This episode is brought to you by the Boneyard Huskies Club. The Boneyard Huskies Club empowers UConn student athletes while providing UConn fans with access to exclusive community, utility, and rewards. Purchase of collectibles featuring your favorite student athletes directly supports the athletes since they receive a majority of the revenue. For more information, go to boneyardhuskiesclub.com. That's Huskies with a YZ at the end. Okay, it is almost NBA draft time, so we've got to check in on some of the UConn prospects here. So joining me today from CBS Sports, it's Kyle Boone. So Kyle, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. I am so excited to talk about my favorite team in college basketball, the UConn Huskies, the national champions. How about that?
Yeah, I mean, you were on the bandwagon early. I want to start with this. What impressed you the most about this team? And we could look back before we start talking all this draft stuff. So I got to ask that
Yeah.
one and throw it out there early.
Yeah, I mean, like, honestly, it's like generic and it feels kind of cliche-ish, but just like the confidence and the swagger that this team carried itself with the entire season was, I think, the most impressive. And I harken back, there's a video of a post-game interview. I think it was with Adama Sanogo. I don't remember who else was there. I think may have been Andre Jackson. They play Oklahoma State. They win by 10 points, and Oklahoma State kind of had them on the ropes a little bit, but it turned out like not really. They end up winning by double digits. And so after the game, and I don't exactly remember the phrasing, and you may actually remember it like word for word, but it was basically like they thought they had us, but
they thought they could win the game, but they
yeah. And so that was like really representative of the team's swagger. Like they just embodied Dan Hurley and like the confidence, the swagger that he oozes every single minute of his day of his life. So to me, that was the most impressive. And even, they had the hard times, kind of at the end of December, early January, and they still found ways to fight out of it. They had some adversity. They figured things out down the stretch. And then obviously kind of the rest is history. They go on a magical run and win the NCAA tournament. So, but the confidence, the way they carried themselves, like that was never a question. They always kind of believed in themselves, both good and bad. And it turned out like they had every reason to believe it because they were like the best team in college basketball. So I thought that was really cool.
For sure. So I'll throw the easy prospect out at you first. So
Yeah.
give me your thoughts on Jordan Hawkins as we head into this draft here. I know there's been a little bit of debate, for sure a first rounder. I think the biggest question mark around him is how high can he go? So curious to get your thoughts on his game and where you think he might be able to go in this draft.
Yeah, it's funny. He's like definitely the highest rated prospect just in terms of like how the NBA views him, but he has like the least amount of notes here in my notes because I think like it's pretty simple. Like he's someone who's a sharpshooter. He's an elite spot up shooting threat. Like he is kind of his own offensive hub in that if you watch him play, like this dude just runs miles and miles and miles, creating his own space. And it's just like a joy to watch him play basketball. So I talked to some scouts about Jordan Hawkins at the NBA Combine, and they gave feedback as like, he is exactly what he is. He's a great shooter. He's going to come into the NBA and be a spot up shooting threat like from day one. I think there's maybe some questions about how his game beyond that will translate if he can shoot off the dribble, which he can do, but I don't think it's like maybe the top of his game right now. It's something that probably needs to develop, but a guy who I think can peel off screens, he can be a spot up shooting threat. And then defensively, I think he gives great effort. I think he's got a lot of potential there as well. So like this is a guy who's probably going to go somewhere in the late lottery would be my guess, like somewhere in the teens. Definitely of the UConn prospects that we'll talk about, I think probably the safest projection, maybe not like a star at the NBA level, but this guy's going to have a role in the NBA. You know exactly what his role is. He is an elite shooter, and he will be that at the NBA level too.
With his skill set in having, what his ability to shoot, do you see him being a guy who you could plug and play kind of right away in the NBA at that level?
I do. I mean, this guy who's like, in the 95th percentile as a spot up shooter last season, like truly one of the best spot up shooting threats in all of college basketball. And I think probably the later he falls in the draft, like it may actually be a better situation for him because, by the NBA's system, basically the later you fall in the first round, like the better the team was last season. So if he falls to, 30th in the draft or 30, like 31, 32, like this is a guy who could end up being, a really impactful shooter from day one, like on a really good playoff team.
Yeah.
I don't think that'll be the case. Like I think he'll end up going somewhere between like, 10 and 20. I would say that's probably like closer to his range. Oklahoma City at 12 makes a lot of sense. There's some teams in the late teens that I think would be really interested in taking a flyer on a shooter. It's just an interesting. I think he's probably an interesting test case because like what he is. He's going to be a really good shooting threat. Like he's going to be exactly that, and he'll be really good in that role, like from day one. But I know the NBA loves youth; they love to bet on upside, and they may take a look at Gigi Jackson, for example, and think, well, this is a guy who was the number one recruit in his class. He's the youngest guy in this class. He's very toolsy. He's got an elite profile, and he didn't have a great season at South Carolina, but maybe we could take a chance on him. I could see teams like talking themselves into players like that earlier than Jordan Hawkins. Think it would be a total mistake, but knowing how the NBA works, like that wouldn't be totally surprising either. So I think to temper expectations, like somewhere between 10 and 20 in this draft feels like pretty accurate for Jordan Hawkins.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair, that range there. After Jordan's announcement, I think the second guy to make his intentions known, and it was a guy who actually decided not to go to the NBA, and that was Donovan Clingan. As you saw this tournament go on, were you surprised that he decided to come back as he continued to play more and more in that tournament? Did you think like, hey, this is a guy who scouts might be salivating over, or is he a guy that, as a 7-2 guy, it's tougher to find a role in the NBA at this stage?
Yeah, I was pretty shocked, to be honest. Like, and maybe this is me being like a UConn homer because I was very in on UConn early in the season, like almost as a bit, just like, oh, just watch out for UConn because everyone's like, who's UConn? Like they might not even be ranked, And so like, so I see Clingan playing well. I'm like, okay, this guy's awesome. Like he's really good. And I'm like, okay, is this like me playing into my bit? Am I just like being a UConn homer at this point? So, but I was surprised. I was genuinely surprised because like 7-footers who can play really solid defense and be efficient scorers around the basket, like those type of guys are really, really valuable in the NBA. And it seemed like down the stretch of the season, UConn was kind of going to him more often than not.
Yeah.
And it felt like he was really blossoming into something that he could have parlayed into, going into the draft process, maybe playing his way into like a late lottery pick or even in the 20s. So that to me was surprising. Like the fact that he didn't test the draft process at all and just said, hey, I'm coming back. Like that's interesting to me. Like he's going to be a guy next season who's like going to be an All-American. And this, I'm not doing my like UConn bit, I swear. But I really believe like he is such a good defender. He's such a good rim finisher. Like he has the skill set to be one of the biggest stars in college basketball next season among front court players. So I'm really excited about him. Like, and the fact that Adama Sanogo is gone, like I think he's going to step in and obviously have a huge role right away, which he didn't have throughout the season. And I think coming back to college will wind up helping him because he will not just have, hey, check out this 6 weeks that I played really well. It's, hey, check out this 4 months of sustained play where I was one of the best players in the Big East. Like this sample size that he's about to put out, I think is going to be really impressive. And I think it'll show just like, hey, I wasn't like a flash in the pan. Like I was really good as a freshman in kind of my limited sample size, but I can do this like over the span of a regular season, and I can do it for like a really good UConn team. So I'm excited to see him next season. I think I would have had him probably as a first round pick. I'm not sure if maybe he got feedback that said, hey, like you maybe in, early second round, mid second round, go ahead and come back. And next year's draft is kind of soft. Maybe you can go and play your way into the late lottery or something. But hopefully, and I think for his sake, I think it'll end up being a good choice for him, and he'll have a huge opportunity next season.
I know they've already talked a little bit about like, hey, you might see Donovan shooting a couple threes next year.
Mm,
Do you think for a guy of his size, as he wants to take his game, as he's looking to take it to the next level to be,
yeah.
a potential, lottery style pick, is that something you think you need to see him do a little bit more next year?
I mean, to me, I think it'd just be a bonus, right? Like, you go to other traditional, like more traditional big men who don't shoot threes, and it's difficult to make a case for like why they should be a lottery pick.
Yeah.
Um, like for example, Trace Jackson Davis, he shot I think either 0 threes or 1 3 at Indiana. Like just a traditional big man. He's really good at rebounding. He's really efficient as a scorer, but he's not a 3-point shooter. And so I was at the NBA Combine. I was watching him do his pro day, and the first thing that one of the scouts mentioned was like, "Hey, this dude's like his jump shot from three like looks pretty good." And they're like, I think that can translate. Like even if he's shooting like 32% from three, like that's something we can build on. And we never saw it at
Yeah.
Indiana. So I think to be able to showcase that, like, Donovan Clingan's not going to come out and just be Steph Curry in the Big East next season. Like he's not going to be the best 3-point shooter in the conference or anything like that. But I think if he can showcase like, hey, I can step out, I can be a floor spacer, adding that element to his game, I think will really unlock a lot of opportunities for him, a lot of potential. And obviously if you're shooting, anywhere close to respectable rate from 3-point
Yeah.
range and you're 7 foot, like, yeah, like we're talking about, maybe a top 10 pick in next year's class. So I'm really high on him. I think my way too early rankings will be somewhere like top 20 for him in the 2024 class. If he has a 3-point shot next season, it just dominates in the way that I think he could, then yeah, I think he'll be able to play his way up boards next season and be one of the big risers for 2024.
So I think the talk about Klingon here makes a nice segue into the other UConn big guy who decided to go the NBA draft route, and that's Adama Sanogo. I mean, talk about a big guy starting to expand his game. We saw him in the tournament hit a few threes. We saw him do that throughout the season. Give me your thoughts on Sanogo, both on what you saw from him during the season, obviously the NCAA tournament most outstanding player,
Yeah.
but also what you saw from him at the Combine as he's trying to prove to these NBA staff and scouts that he's a guy who has potential at the next level.
Yeah. I wasn't a huge fan of Sanogo, like coming into the season, just in terms of his NBA prospects. To me, he almost unfairly, I think, probably fit into a category where it's like Drew Timme, like great
Yeah.
college prospect, going to be really dominant in college. Not sure how his game translates to the NBA level. And I think throughout the season, he kind of proved like that's wrong. Like that's just not how you should think about him as a prospect. I mean, he's like 6'10", he's 250 pounds. So the size, the frame is there. He's a great rebounder. He has good shooting touch, and he's
Yeah.
improved every single season at UConn to the point where, this past season, he's like shooting 37% from three. And this is like, again, kind of going back to the Klingan talk. Like if you're close to 7 foot and you're a big man who has kind of a more traditional big man profile, but you can also shoot 3-pointers, like that is really valuable. And he did it at a really high level this past season for a UConn team that, he was the MOP for the team that won the national championship. So I think what he did this past season is really impressive. Scouts are really impressed, like just with the way he carries himself. I'm sure UConn fans know this. Like he's just someone who you want to root for. He's very fun.
Overall good guy. Yeah.
Just like a good guy. Yeah. And like, I haven't met him. I don't know him. I can't like vouch for him, but like everyone around him just raves. Like this dude will bust his hiney. He wants to work so hard to become the best version of himself. So I'm rooting for him. Like I have him 54 on the CBS Sports big board right now. So that would be like a late second round pick.
Mm-hmm.
Team that is looking for, depth in the front court, it would make a lot of sense. Like I think he's a draftable player, and he's probably unfairly categorized as kind of a throwback big man, whereas he's got like the skill set to be kind of a modern day big who can play both inside and out.
What do you see out of him at the Combine? And as you were talking to some of the scouts, I know you talked about maybe some mixed feelings early, but are
Mm-hmm.
people starting to catch on to him and see him as a guy who does have some legs in the NBA?
Yeah, I think so. I can't remember exactly if it was a scrimmage or maybe it was just an informal setting. Sanogo, I think, was on one team, and I think Oscar Sheboy may have been on the other, or maybe it was Drew Timmy. But someone just made kind of an offhanded comment. It was NBA personnel, just like, and who would you rather have, like Sanogo or Sheboy, like for your NBA team? And it's like no brainer. I'd rather have Sanogo, like, which is just like wild to think about. Just you have to kind of erase your priors and think about, like, Sheboy was a guy who was very highly touted, McDonald's All-American, went to Kentucky, was National Player of the Year. Like in a vacuum, that sales pitch is like very enticing, but you watch him play and you watch Sanogo play and you're like, man, I think his game can translate a lot more seamlessly than maybe some of these other bigs in this class can translate to the NBA level. So that was kind of the vibe I got. And then obviously, like, just the feedback that I got just from, his interviews, like people around him, just character seems to check out. People are really excited about him as a person. And obviously as a player as well, like this guy who could be drafted, but just kind of all around, like, I think well-rounded player, prospect, human. People are excited about him. So I think he's definitely like improved his draft stock here over the last few weeks.
Is he a guy you felt comfortable just deciding to opt the draft route versus possibly returning to UConn? As in, like, hey, at this point his game is what it is, and he probably isn't going to gain much coming back to college for another year.
Yeah, I think I could have seen it go either way, to be honest. I mean, with NIL now, it's like, I know his situation specifically may be more complicated,
Yeah.
but the money that you can make as one of the most recognizable faces in college basketball, I mean, just like go ask Drew Timmy. Like, he did pretty well for himself last season. And so that's why everyone's like, is Drew Timmy like for sure gone? Is he going to come back to Gonzaga? Because like the money he'd get is probably insane. So I could see it either way. To me, it makes sense that he stays in the NBA draft. Like, he had a breakout season. He's a junior. He showed for the first time that he can space the floor. He shot really well from 3-point range. He won a national stinking championship with the UConn Huskies. He's averaging almost a double-double every single night. So he probably could have come back and averaged 20 and 10 next season for UConn, and him and Donovan Clingan would have been just an elite 1-2 combo down low. But I think it makes sense for him to go capitalize on the big season that he had, maybe go be drafted, go make some money in the NBA, kickstart your professional clock. Clingan, he can go step in and kind of take the reins. So I think it makes a lot of sense for everyone involved.
I'm going to take a quick break from the interview to tell you about my friends at Martin Rosol's Meats. This fourth-generation Connecticut family business produces kielbasa, hot dogs, sausages, and deli meats using Martin Rosol's very own original recipes. Their products can be found in grocery stores, delis, restaurants, and hot dog stands throughout the state. And if you're looking for your fill right away, check out their retail store in New Britain. For more information, visit martinroselsinc.com and go support a UConn fan-owned business. And now, back to the interview. So moving from the big guys, let's take a look at the guards a little bit. And I know Tristan Newton, not a guy who made it to the NBA combine, but was at the G League combine. Give me some initial thoughts on Tristan and how you think his game might translate. I know we're still awaiting a decision for him, whether he returns to UConn or decides to stay in and go the NBA or professional route.
Yeah, I got my tinfoil hat on here. Here's my conspiracy theory. Tristan Newton played really well at the G League Elite Camp. It, like, so well that I'm like kind of shocked that he didn't get a combine invite.
I thought he was going to get one based on the stats he put up.
Like, I had a running list of like players deserving of a combine invite. Tristan Newton was like literally number 2 on my list. So when they released the list, I think it was 7 players, and he was not on it. I was like, some team paid off whoever's making this list because they did not want Tristan Newton to go to the combine and dominate, because he played really well. I thought he looked like he belonged. He's a long guard. Like, he can do so many different things. He can shoot the 3. Like, he's got good range. He's got good feel. Like, he's kind of the glue that holds everything together. So I was surprised that he didn't get a combine invite, but yeah, like, he's, a little bit older in terms of like how NBA teams typically view prospects, and that will probably end up maybe hurting him a little bit. Like, he's a senior. So Typically like the NBA likes to value youth.
Yeah.
They value, guys who are, one and dones because they think upside. But the development that he's shown, the last few years, the shooting consistency that he plays with, and then just like the feel that I talked about, like he can be a creator, a playmaker, he could be a shooter, like he can morph into so many things that you want from kind of a combo guard in the NBA. So I really like him. I don't know exactly where I have him right now on the big board. I'll have to look, but someone who like, if he comes back, I wouldn't be totally surprised, but if he leaves, I wouldn't be totally surprised either, because I think his profile, like in kind of a nutshell, projects like pretty well for what I think the NBA is looking for.
All right, so I saved that, who I think at least gives us the best conversation here for last, and that's Andre Jackson.
Yes.
I think he's just such an interesting kind of test case to look at here when you're talking NBA draft and going from college to the NBA. I mean, I think the pros for Andre Jackson just jump off the page, and I think everyone really got to see that during the NCAA tournament. But the constant holdback you hear on him is his shot, and that being something that is going to hold him back, possibly going to the next level. Give us your thoughts on Andre Jackson, and let's have some fun with this one.
Boo, boo.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yeah, I disagree. And I think that's probably like the "you don't know ball" take, which you probably will hear like on Twitter.
Yes.
He is a fantastic basketball player. Like, you can look at the counting stats and be like, oh, well, okay, he only shot, looking here, 28.1% from three. He shot 64.6% from the free throw line, 43.2% from field goal range. So like, it's not a profile that is necessarily appealing. 6.7 points per game, 6.2 rebounds, 4.7 assists. But watching him at the combine, like, just be the energy for his team, the guy who just like holds everyone together. He's a playmaker, he's a ball handler. He's not necessarily a shooter, but I really don't care. Like, everything he does, I think is like so impressive. And like, I've literally been, because I knew we were going to do this interview today, and I've been thinking about Andre Jackson Jr. all day today, which is like hilarious to even admit. But I'm like, man, I have him too low. And I'm like looking at my big board. I have him 27. And I could seriously make a case for him being a top 20 player in this class. I know that's not like probably consensus, but super high feel for the game, great IQ. He can blend into a number of different situations. He's 6'6", 6'7", with, perfect profile, I think, to be kind of a combo guard in the NBA. Like, he was really good for UConn down the stretch. And you look at his numbers, like, he scored 3 points in the national championship game. And like,
but his still really was all over the game. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So like, it probably is. It's one of those things where I think people tend to look back at like counting stats and just be like, oh, well, he was 0 for 1 from 3 in the title game. You only had 3 rebounds, 3 points, 3 fouls. Like, are we sure this guy should go like top 20 in the draft? But like, the answer is probably yes. Like, he's a really good player and someone that I want to bet on, not just because like everything he does in terms of like on the court, but what he does off the court too. Like, he is, by all accounts, like the guy that kind of held this team together when they had some struggles last season. He helped rally the troops. They rallied down the stretch of the season. They win the NCAA tournament. And like, Andre Jackson is a huge, huge reason for that. Maybe he wasn't the most productive player. You look at this, the points per game, the assists per game, the rebounds per game, all that stuff. I don't care. I think he's a really good player. And he's going to end up, I think in a few years, we're going to look up and be like, oh, wow, well, like, how did we miss on Andre Jackson Jr.? And the answer is like, I don't know. Like, I think we just fall in love with the counting stats. We see someone who, maybe didn't have amazing numbers at UConn, but he's a huge reason why this team just won the national championship. And like Andre Jackson over Victor Wembanyama, I'm starting to talk myself into it now. Like, I think he should go number 1 overall.
When you're looking at Andre and hearing what you're hearing from NBA scouts, is he a guy that you see, if he stays in the draft again? He's another guy who, we're recording this Tuesday night, hasn't made an official declaration of whether or not he's going to stick the professional route or come back to UConn. Is he a guy you think is a first rounder at this point based on the feedback you've gotten?
Yeah, I have him. I have him at 27. So that's like my soft flag plant. I think he's a first rounder, but like he could go
Yeah.
second round. Um, I will admit, probably, goodness, I have a lot of UConn bias apparently, but like I'm probably higher on Andre Jackson than probably how the NBA views him.
Hmm.
Like realistically, I would say probably his draft range, at least at the moment, I would ballpark it as like 25 would be like, whoa, I can't believe he went that high, to somewhere between 40, like 25 and
Yeah.
40. So most likely like an early second round pick, mid second round pick. And that's where I think it becomes a really difficult decision. Especially if you're Andre Jackson, like you have a difficult choice. Do you come back to college and build on what you did this past season, and or do you just like ride into the sunset
Yeah.
like Adama Sanogo? Like it's a really tough choice. NIL opportunities, I think, obviously factor in um, to some extent with these conversations. I think probably in most players' cases, they're looking for a guaranteed contract, which is top
Yeah.
35, top 40 pick in the draft. That's a solid investment where a team is willing to invest in you like long term, and it's not just like a two-way deal where you have to kind of bet on yourself. If he doesn't get that, then I could definitely see him coming back to school. But like at this point, again, I've kind of tried to talk myself into him being a top 30 player in
Yeah.
this class, and it's hard to look at it objectively, and think that NBA teams won't think the same thing.
When you talk about his game and you talk about just some of those counting stats,
Yeah.
do you see him possibly benefiting from coming back to school for another year? Maybe those numbers go up a little bit. And I know you mentioned, the draft is a little bit softer, the class heading into next year. But at the same
Mhm.
point, you've talked about how much the NBA values age, and he's only getting older at this point. Like,
Right.
I think, as you mentioned, he's just in a really tough spot as you're trying to figure out, what direction you want to go. How do you weigh that between, is it worth coming back, trying to pad some stats a little bit more versus going now and riding off the high of a national championship?
It's so tough. I don't envy these players at all for making these decisions. Like I could weigh in and be like, here's probably what I would do, but like it's so
Yeah.
stressful. Like even just thinking about some of these decisions that they have. So, I mean, in kind of a nutshell, I think probably the best decision for him would be to stay in the NBA draft. Um, because here's the thing, like you can pitch yourself as someone who's like, he can do it all. He's a
Yeah.
combo guard who can create. He's got good feel for the game, like amazing teammate. He can be a defensive playmaker. He's always in the right place at the right time, super coachable, infectious attitude, like just checks a ton of boxes for what NBA teams like to bet on. You come back to college, it could go one of two ways, honestly. You could come back to college and you could just become one of college basketball's like biggest older breakout stars. Like you could come back
Yeah.
for a senior season. You could shoot 35% from three, average 14 a game. And suddenly like, okay, well, yeah, he had great counting stats in his senior year. And that was like kind of validation for like what we saw analytically behind the scenes as his profile. Like does it all, can do a number of different things. He's just kind of a winner. The other way it could go is he comes back next season, shot 28% from three last season. He comes back and shoots 27.8% from three. He averages 8
Yeah.
points per game. And suddenly it's like, well, that's kind of a hard sell. If
Yeah.
like he still does all those things at a really high level, like again, like the profile for Andre Jackson is very impressive, and like someone that I think a lot of NBA teams would be happy to take a gamble on the second round or even late in the first round. But it becomes a harder sell if you don't make significant strides. So that's I think probably the catch-22 for him, and probably what he's weighing a little bit is exactly what his stock is now and maybe what it could be next season, projecting like some of the best outcomes and the worst outcomes of coming back to school or just deciding to stay in the NBA draft. So it's tough. I don't envy him one bit.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy when you think about his kind of arc here too, because it seemed like up until right outside the national championship game, he was talking about coming back for like possibly another year or two, even because I think he has the extra COVID year still. And it
Yeah.
seemed like Dan Hurley really had to push him into being like, go test the waters here and see what you could do. And now we're talking about him possibly, ending up in the first round, which I think just goes to show you, the type of player he is, and
Mhm.
how humble he is too, in terms of thinking that, maybe he wasn't going to be an NBA guy, and here he is, and possibly a first round pick. So I think
Well,
I
yeah,
think I
he
think
had
his
the
story is going
comments
to be, yeah,
like after, I don't remember, it was like right after winning the national championship, but it was basically like, oh well, I'm coming back to UConn. Like it
yeah,
was like no debate. Like, I'm coming back, and we're like, oh, okay, all right, Andre Jackson's coming back, and then he tests the waters, and yeah, to your point, like I think he's probably had great feedback during this process to the point where it is like a legitimately hard decision. And maybe he knew that he would get good feedback all along, but like it doesn't really
yeah,
seem like it. It seems like he's just kind of like living almost in his own little bubble where he's like very humble, and he like sees
yeah,
himself as just kind of an everyman who likes to work and play basketball. Like he's just a good dude who really likes to grind. So it's actually been really fun to see kind of his arc and trajectory during this process, and to the point where now, like, I think one of the biggest kind of stay or go decisions kind of lingering out there as the early entry withdrawal deadline approaches later this week.
yeah. No, I can't wait to see how that decision is. I know I'll be
Yeah.
thrilled either way. Like if he's going, can't wait to see what he does at the next level. When he's back at UConn. Let's go.
Yes.
Repeat coming. I'll wrap with this one because I know we already started talking a little bit about what potentially the next year's draft class could look like. If
Yeah.
I take Donovan Clingan out of the equation, who else
Mm.
on this team excites you the most about their possibilities at the next level?
Oh, Alex Garabin, baby. Alex
Hey,
Garabin, let's
he's
go.
he's my podcast co-host. I like that. I like that. Boost our numbers here.
Oh, no way. All
Yeah,
right. I legitimately did not know this. So this is organic growth here for the podcast.
there we go.
I'm a huge Alex Garabin fan. Someone who I think his game can translate like pretty seamlessly to the NBA. Like
Yeah,
he's 6'8", 6'9". He's got great size. He's a really good shooter. Like can play both ends of the floor. I think his playmaking is like pretty underrated. So yeah, this is great podcast advertisement. I love Alex Garabin. Big fan of Alex Garabin. Big fan of the show. I really cannot wait to see him next season. Like the flashes that he showed last season. One of the most, I think, underrated pieces of that title team. And you go back and look, like just the impact that he had on a ton of those games. He was huge in like some huge stretches for UConn. So in a bigger role next season, like I'm really excited to see him. And I think he'll end up being like someone who will be a potential first round pick in 2024. I don't want to hype him up too much here for the pod, but I'm excited to see Alex Garabin next season.
Well, Kyle, I really appreciate you taking the time, and I think like move over Rob Doster. Like, I mean, I think you're gonna be UConn fans' new favorite national
My
writer there.
gosh. My gosh, I just need one of those sweatshirts. If you're watching on YouTube, oh my gosh, that is an
Yeah,
amazing
we got
sweatshirt. Is this
the old
home
Husky.
home
No,
field?
this is just a Nike one. So
Oh, that is fantastic.
yeah.
I love the little, yes, the Huskies fantastic. I need to go to home field or somewhere, get me some Huskies memorabilia. It's fantastic. Yes.
I love it. Well, Kyle, thank you so much for joining. This is a great chat. I know everyone's really looking forward to this draft, especially with the amount of UConn players this year.
I
It's been
know.
exciting with Dan Hurley here. Last year had a couple guys in the conversation, and now have some more. So exciting to see things coming out of UConn like this.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for having me on the show, Jared. And be sure to tell my new favorite NBA draft prospect, Alex, that I said hello.
I will. Thanks, Kyle.